So a little bit about Microdesk. We've been in business for 22 some odd years right now. We're an AECO industry consulting firm, which means we're consultants to the architects, engineers, construction, and operations industries. We've got 11 offices around the country, plus we've expanded into the United States, into the United Kingdom. We've got 150, about 150 staff members, software specialists, software developers, Maximo specialists on our staff. Some of the partners that we work with is everybody from Autodesk through IBM, and then there's a variety of other partners in there, Microsoft, Panzura, Trimble, so forth. The clients that we've worked with is quite a variety of them. Most notably for today's discussion is the one that you see on the right-hand side there, which is companies like the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, the New York, New Jersey Link, Stanford University, Healthcare, Columbia University. And we'll go into some of the use cases as to how they're using the software. Stanford University was a very interesting study that we did where we looked at what are the benefits of using BIM with an asset management system like Maximo. Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, we've been using that for quite some time, helping them for preparing their asset management program and now implementing and supporting their overall asset management system. Just waiting for the screens to catch up for everybody. So today's presenters, we have on the line myself, George Broadbent, the Director of Asset Management here. 25 plus years experience in enterprise systems, asset management systems, and in an overall information architecture and management, which means that generally speaking, I look at all these issues that the construction, the design, construction, and the operations industries face as an information challenge. How do we look at the information? How do we source it? How do we ensure that it's valid? And how do we transfer it from one group to the next consistently? Brandon, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Brandon Pominville. I'm a senior Maximo consultant here at Microdesk. I've been working with Maximo and integrating Maximo and asset management systems with other external systems and data sources for more than 10 years. I have 15 years of experience in the IT industry over that time period as well.
And we also have on the line Andrew Tess. Andrew, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Andrew Tess, and I'm a Maximo consultant here at Microdesk for around a decade of Maximo experience and have come from the IT world in higher education originally.
Fantastic. So, like I said, if you have questions during this, there's a question section on the dashboard. You can ask your questions, and between the three of us, I think we'll be able to cover anything you bring up. So let's talk about how ModelStream can be used for facilities management. Now we'll get into what ModelStream is and how it's used during this. Well, let's look very briefly. And this is a follow-on presentation to a webinar that we did a few months back, talking about ModelStream being used in facilities operations and maintenance, and why we would want to use it. So when we look at asset management, enterprise facilities asset management, there's a number of drivers that are influencing how you structure your asset management program. So you start off with things like the ISO 55000 standards, which describes how the organization should be set up. And then you have not only your corporate social responsibility and sustainability programs, but now you have things like sensors, what they call the Industrial Internet of Things, or IoTs, and looking at how that information is going to be feeding back into your organization and how you would use that information. Then, of course, we have the ever-expanding field of mobility. Facilities operations wants to be able to use mobile devices so that they can get to more information quicker. And then overall, from a top-down level perspective, we have these advanced analytics that can look at everything that's going on in the organization by pulling together all of this information that we have at our fingertips. And so we can look at how well systems are performing and even start to get into predicting when systems will fail. But the ISO 55000 standards, as I was starting to say before, really describes a governance principle for your asset management program. So it starts off at the top level here. How do you manage the organization itself? And then within that organizational management, there's an asset management program, what we call the capital A. Within the program sits a system, an asset management system, the lowercase a. And then the asset management system manages your asset portfolio. And really, in order for any of these programs to be effective, you need good data. You need data consistency across the entire structure of your asset management program. And so, again, when we look at, what's the maturity of an enterprise asset management system, really what you're seeing here in this chart is that when you are just starting out with your enterprise asset management program, you have a higher cost for your operations and maintenance and a lower performance. And as your system matures, it will start to drive down your maintenance costs and increase your performance. And really the shift that we see from the first three sections to the last two sections is where asset operations and maintenance in an asset management program goes from becoming an expense item, and we all know that expense items are always trying to be controlled and cut for organizations, and it shifts over to actually becoming an investment in the organization. And what that allows us to do is start to focus our money on where in facilities operations we need to spend the money, not just spending money for the sake of spending money. So the challenge, though, in getting to these advanced or more mature asset management programs is the fundamental starting point, which is the data. Without reliable and consistent data, the goals or the objectives of an ISO 55000 program can't be achieved. And that's where BIM and Maximo come into play. Now, what are the goals and the metrics that ISO 55000 says that we can achieve? It talks about things like being able to ensure greater uptime and reliability of equipment. It talks about being able to reduce the cost of having supplies on hand. It talks about reducing the overall operations and maintenance budget, or even making the operations and maintenance more efficient. So it's all about cost savings and efficiency as a part of the ISO standards. So BIM and Maximo really are the enabling tools that allows us to start to achieve those goals. So building information management, BIM, and that represents the data consistency that you need. It's really the starting point for the data consistency. And in our own studies, we've shown that the combination of BIM and a facilities management system can achieve a net 5% savings on the annual operations expenditures. And from our perspective, the BIM process is really now a part of operations. And then over the next 5 years, just like two-dimensional paper drawings or two-dimensional PDF drawings are critical to operations, the BIM models are really going to become critical to operations. And so the BIM process defines the process, the data, the deliverable for construction. But when we look at the data, again, the BIM data that's generated is useful in operations. The data that's captured during construction is needed in operations. And as I said before, 100% of the 3D models and the floor plans are needed in operations. So this transition from design and construction into operations really now becomes a critical period here. And we call that the data transition period. And so what does that look like when we start to marry BIM with operations? So in this case here, it's a complete circle. It's not a linear process. It's a complete circle. We go from conceptualization to the design and documentation, your construction process. There's, generally speaking, some kind of a commissioning process that's attached to your construction process, and then a data transition period into maintenance and operations. And as you'll see later on in the demo, the maintenance and operations is connected to the conceptualization because we're able to now freely move the data between the maintenance and operations systems and the BIM systems. So again, that data transition period, that's now defined by the software that we have, which is called ModelStream. And then operations and maintenance is now handled by IBM Maximo. So ModelStream is going to create the Maximo assets. It's going to take the attributes from the Revit model and populate them into the Maximo system. It's going to create a location hierarchy where the assets are classified, and any kind of attachments such as O&M manuals, cut sheets, and so forth that are present in the Revit model are now copied over and populated into the asset management system. And then it's this bidirectional synchronization, this being able to freely move data back and forth between the operations maintenance system and the Revit model that allows us to really start to do things that were honestly never possible before. We get to start to visualize where work is and where work is being done. We get to start to look at the assets in context of their surroundings. And again, it goes back to the question of being able to deliver more information to the facilities maintenance and operations people means for a better outcome, meaning more efficient processes and overall cost savings. So very quickly here, and again, this is, I've covered some of this in the last webinar here, so we'll just do a quick little recap here. But what does the typical data transition timeline look like? And this is the problem that when we first encountered this, we looked at for a way to solve this problem. So you start off at day one, which is the end of construction. At the end of major construction, that's when operations begins. And then there's a process for preparing deliverables, doing construction closeouts, preparing deliverables, and delivering the information to operations. But in the meantime, you have ongoing facilities operations. So the maintenance staff will go out, they're going to survey the facility, they're going to find the equipment that's been installed. And then, as you'll see in the next slide here, when equipment fails, they're just going to go ahead and replace it because they don't have the information about what was installed or what warranty information is available to us. So it becomes a very critical period. And then, of course, in the traditional mode, the deliverable that you see is the picture that you see on the right there, which is really just a collection of boxes. Maybe you get sophisticated and you get DVDs with all this information, but it's still information that's not genuinely accessible every day by the maintenance and operations staff. So let's talk about that 18-month period in which the data is being prepared, again, in a traditional environment. So what do you lose in the 18 months? You lose the warranty information, you lose extended warranty information, you lose what equipment has been installed. And the operations staff, as we were saying before, is left to really figure out what's there. But we already know that the data exists. The data exists, traditionally, again, it exists either on a DVD or in a box full of paper. But the information is not accessible to facilities operations. And so what you're seeing in this curve is the is one of the three scenarios in which equipment can fail. And that is where there's a higher percentage of equipment failure rates in the beginning after a piece of equipment is installed than during the middle period during the lifespan of the piece of equipment. And so we call this period here the blind spot for the facilities operation, because they've got equipment that has a high potential of failure, but they don't have the information to back them up. And if you've gone through the construction process and you've paid for warranties and extended warranties, and facilities doesn't have that information, that's money that you've just thrown away. So again, how do we get there? Well, there's a process that we have to go through to develop what we call as-built drawings. Okay, and these are, typically, when you ask for, as an owner, if you ask for an as-built, there's a level of detail based upon the AIA specifications that you would typically include in your specifications for what the deliverable would be. But those deliverables mean I'm asking for an LOD 350, 400, 500 model, and I expect for the entire model to be of one uniform level of detail. But that's not always the case in terms of what operations need. They don't necessarily need to know what every little nook and cranny looks like on an HVAC system, but they need to know the data that belongs to it. So what we wind up in our facilities model, or what we advocate for in our facilities models, is this range of levels of detail within the model. So you may have some elements that are represented as a mass, and then some elements that are represented as an LOD 500 element with a high fidelity and a large amount of detail associated with it. So we call this a composite BIM model. And this composite BIM model is really what the facilities operations needs, so that they can have access to all the latest information and use it for their work. And as I said earlier, we did a study with Stanford University Healthcare, and we looked at combining a BIM model with facilities maintenance and operations systems. And really, this study for us proves why it is that we need to have BIM in operations. It's really the validation of the entire process. BIM for design has been proven to be extremely useful and beneficial. BIM for construction, again, another very useful tool. You can save lots of time and money using BIM in both those processes. But then when we talk about BIM for operations, we need to start to quantify why it is that we're using BIM for operations. And this study is where we went through a number of different use cases. We looked at things like plumbing leaks, shutdown requests, which is an electrical system shutdown request, structural and fire safety analysis, integrated finish schedules, like what is the paint color for the various rooms, if you have a color scheme for your room, for your entire facility. How do you train new staff, and then how do you put new assets into the system? And so when we looked at all these different use cases, we came up with a net savings on all of these use cases. And as you can see, I mean, this adds up to a tremendous number of hours. And when we projected this out over the entire operations and maintenance program, the net savings to operations and maintenance was about 5% annually. And there's going to be a detailed use case that we're going to be presenting later this month, where we're going to go through the actual numbers of how we came to the cost savings and how we derived the net 5% savings. But what this really proves to us is that BIM has a very beneficial role in the design, the construction, and now in the operations process. And that's really where, so just to sort of recap a little bit, that's where ModelStream comes into play, because we need to have a smooth and efficient handover from the construction or the commissioning process into operations and maintenance. we don't want to spend a lot of time or energy transferring the data, and ModelStream is going to allow us to very smoothly and easily transfer that data over. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brandon, and where he's going to show ModelStream and what it can do for us and how it's used in facilities operations. I will point out that this is the third webinar in the series for ModelStream. So if in the previous two webinars we went through a lot of the details of how exactly the Revit model is structured, what the mechanics are of moving the data over into the Maximo system, and then how the data moves back into the Revit model itself. So for the purpose of this webinar, we're really going to be focusing on the Maximo system itself and looking at how once the data is over into our Maximo system, how the data is used. And I would encourage you to, after this webinar as well, to go back and look at some of those past webinars that are posted on our website, because they really go into quite a bit of detail. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brandon.
All right. Thank you, George. All right. So I'm going to go through a couple of specific use cases. And again, as George mentioned, these are going to be focused more on the operational side, basically how you can use the data from ModelStream and some of the features such as the model viewer and a concept we call MX parameters. So I'll basically go through two of those scenarios, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. Okay, so I'm in a Maximo environment here. I'm using data that has already been loaded from a Revit model using ModelStream. It's been loaded into Maximo. The model I'm using today is a sample model from Autodesk, their hospital model. So if you're at all familiar with that, you'll see that being used today. So the first scenario here is how you can use the model viewer from a work order perspective. So I have a sample work order here for a heating coil that was found to be leaking. So with ModelStream, you get this model viewer tab that gets embedded into your asset and work order tracking applications. So in this case, this work order is specifies this one particular asset that needs some maintenance work done on it. When I click on the Model Viewer tab, you can see that it loads a model. This is using the Autodesk Forge platform, so it does not require any browser plugins or any type of client software. It's just using the web browser itself. When this loads, this work order has one or more assets associated with it, and you get that in this work order tab on the left-hand side of the screen. There's only one asset for this particular work order, so that asset is automatically selected in the most precise view that matches the asset. So I'll zoom out a little bit here. You get a better view of this particular corridor of floor 5 in this model. And so you can see this heating coil here, and the Maximo asset information for that is also shown right here. We have the main asset properties easily accessible right alongside the model viewer. You can see all the basic asset information here, asset description, status, and so on. And you also get all of the Maximo attributes for that asset right here. So you don't have to switch screens or go somewhere else to get that information. It's all easily accessible. You also get the Revit properties for that element as well. So this is quite a long list here of properties that you have accessible directly from within Maximo, even though this data may not be loaded directly into Maximo. So what I'm going to do here is interact with this model a little bit. So you can see if this coil is leaking, one of the first things you might want to do is figure out, okay, where can I turn the supply and return water lines off? Those are shown here very easily. You can see those ball valves are right here. And when I select these, and this is the case for anything I select in the model, the asset information is updated to show me the properties for that. So now I'm looking at asset 9152, which is the ball valve, and I get all the Maximo asset information for that. If I switch to this other ball valve over here, I can see that this is asset 9153, and I get all those properties. But more importantly, I know where these are, so I can turn off the water. Now, in the case where I might want to just get more information about some elements in the model, you may not want to load piping and pipe accessories into Maximo, but that information is still available from the model. So if I select one of these pipes, I can still see all the Revit information available for this right here. You know, I can get diameters, I can get materials, you know, inside, outside diameters, and so on. So that's really useful if you, you know, if this may be obstructed behind, you know, ceiling or something else, you can get that information right at your fingertips. Okay. The second scenario with the model viewer that I want to show is just a different variety of using the model viewer for a work order. In this case, I'm going to open up this kind of a PM work order here to clean the heating coils. You can see if I scroll down, I look at the asset list. I have 7 assets attached to this work order. Some of these are located on the 5th floor in some different rooms. Some are on the 4th floor, and some are on the 3rd floor. Okay, so when I click on the Model Viewer tab, in this case, it's again going to load the associated model that matches these assets. But this is going to demonstrate some of our newest functionality, which is the ability to specify room and floor views that match the particular asset you're trying to view. So rather than trying to see the whole building or create your own views, you can kind of predefine these, and then it makes a much more usable experience within Maximo and the ModelStream model viewer. Okay, so when I clicked on the Model Viewer tab here, I get the list of assets on the work order over here on the left-hand side in this work order tab. And the first one is automatically selected. And you can see in this case, it shows the 3rd floor view as the view that matches the location hierarchy most directly. And you can, you know, again, interact with this in the viewer. And if I just zoom out here, you can see that this is basically like a 3D floor plan, a 3D view of just this particular floor. So if I select some of these other assets in the list here, what this is going to do is switch the view if necessary. So in this case, it switched to a view on the 5th floor, and then it selected that asset because this particular one is on the 5th floor, corridor 5. Okay. And then you can see this is basically just a room within the model. So you can get a very detailed look at a mechanical room or what have you. And again, you can interact with this model. You can full functionality as you would expect from a model viewer. Okay, if I go through a couple of these other ones, you can see this particular asset's on the 4th floor. So I get the whole 4th floor here, and then it will zoom in and select that particular asset. And again, I can see any of the properties of elements near that asset, so I can get the information I need before I go out and actually do any maintenance or inspections on this. I can get that right from the 3D model viewer. Okay. So that's kind of scenario one, leveraging the model viewer from an operational perspective and how the ModelStream view functionality allows you to see a very precise view that you choose how to define those and what level of detail you want for your maintenance staff without all the extra clutter of the whole building, kind of getting in the way. Okay, the second feature that I'm going to show you today is what we call MX parameters. So I'm back in Revit now. I'm looking at the hospital model, and I'm looking at a couple of specific views here. So before I jump into ModelStream, I'm going to just point out and preload these views and a schedule, and we'll kind of populate some data from Maximo and see how the MX parameter functionality can be leveraged to allow you to bring in that maintenance and operational data from Maximo back into the Revit model, and then use that to visualize or use it in a schedule so you can see that data kind of in real time in the Revit model. All right, so I have this view that's up on my screen right now is the mechanical penthouse here. These are where the air handling units are. I also have the same fifth floor corridor that we were just looking at in Maximo. And then the other item is the schedule. Right now there's nothing in here because I haven't imported any of the data from Maximo. But what this is going to show me is where my open work orders are. The schedule will give me a listing of them, and then we'll go back to these views so we can see where those work orders are open. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the main functionality of ModelStream here because that's covered in other webinars. But I am going to use ModelStream to import the MX parameters. So I launched ModelStream from the Revit ribbon bar. It's making a connection to Maximo. And once I'm logged in here, and it retrieves some of the Maximo metadata, it's going to give me the main menu where I can import the MX parameters. Okay, so here's the main screen. Again, I'm not going to go through the synchronization, but this is where you would create the mappings and export or import the data. What I am going to go through is the MX mappings. So MX mappings are a feature of ModelStream. And again, the concept here was to allow you to temporarily, although you can leave them there permanently if you choose to do so, temporarily bring in data from your Maximo asset management system and use that in Revit in a for a specific purpose. So what I'm going to be bringing in is a Maximo attribute for the work orders open for the past 6 months. This data could be anything, though. It could be work orders currently open, work orders over the past 30 days. It could be sensor data being read in from IoT devices. Basically anything. I mean, this could be automated through an integration, or even using some of the Maximo add-on capabilities for your asset health score, for example. That information could be brought back into Revit using ModelStream. Okay, so I'm launching the Import MX Parameters dialog here. This will just take a few seconds to give me a preview of the data that is to be imported from Maximo. So just take a moment here. I'm on a rather slow network connection, so bear with me. And what this is actually doing while it's loading this import preview is for the selected MX parameters, it's retrieving the data from Maximo to give me a summary of what that's going to be imported back into the Revit model. And for the data set I have mapped, I think this is bringing in roughly 400 or 500 assets to determine what values need to be imported back into Revit. Okay. So now I have the summary here of what's going to be imported. I'll go ahead and let this run. This will take a moment to run as well. And what this is doing is it's actually creating and importing the data from Maximo. So basically every element in Revit for the selected families, it will have an attribute for the work orders open for the past 6 months. That data will be brought in from Maximo and actually created as a parameter in Revit. Okay, so that has executed here successfully. We'll go ahead and close out of ModelStream. And now you can see the schedule that I had open previously. Now there's data to support this. You can see some of these ball valves and the coils and air handling units. They have data here that was brought in from Maximo. All right, so you can use this in a schedule just like you would any other Revit data. And the other item here that I'll show you is these same views. So the mechanical penthouse here, if you remember, this has air handling units, and now there's a couple that are shown here with different colors. So basically, this is just using standard Revit functionality. So any of the color coding here, you can define as you'd like. But I have some filters defined. So if there are 3 or 4 open work orders, that is shown in yellow. So that's this air handling unit here. And then this other one that's in this kind of magenta color. This one has a higher number. This has 6 work orders for the past 6 months. So you can, quickly see from here which equipment is having more issues, which equipment or which portions of the building might need to have a higher focus from a maintenance perspective to try to understand why that equipment is failing more often, or why it needs to have work done more often. Actually, this view doesn't show it as well, so I'll use this the mechanical one here to kind of leave off on. All right, so those are the 2 scenarios that I wanted to cover. I guess I'll turn it back over to George here to kind of wrap things up.
All right, thank you, Brandon. Share my screen here. So the interesting thing about what we just saw was twofold. One, we get to see beyond what is in a traditional asset management system. When we talk about a Maximo system or any other traditional asset management system, the information that's loaded into that system is limited to the piece of equipment that's defined as an asset. So in the one example there, Brandon was showing us how we could look at the piece of pipe and see that it's a steel pipe. And it's that kind of information that we found in our study with Stanford, that was where the efficiencies were gained by the maintenance staff. It's that additional information, it's that assets and context that I referred to before. That's the key thing for the operations. Operations is, generally speaking, starved for information, and so giving them not only a set of populated assets in a system on day one of operations, but also giving them the contextual information, i.e. where's the valve, what's the material, how do I get to the valve, will save them time and then ultimately save money in performing their work. And then the other piece that he showed that's valuable is being able to look at where the work is occurring. So when you look at the work and the areas where work is being done, you can start to draw conclusions as to other issues. What's causing there to be a cluster of work orders in this one particular area? So you can look at beyond just the piece of equipment. Again, it's that contextual information that the Revit system gives you, and ModelStream is the enabling tool to allow you to fill in the gaps. So when we talk about the entire process, let's go back and look at the entire picture and how it all comes together. We talk about things like planning, pre-construction, construction, commissioning, post-construction, and into operations. These are generally speaking the phases of any kind of development or redevelopment work. So in phase one, which is your information piece, it's your information gathering piece. Phase two is where you capture the information, and phase three is the information transfer phase. What we have is, and then that obviously ultimately leads into operations. So we start off with a data management piece, and we call these BIM for FM guidelines. It really becomes the foundational piece for how are we going to structure this data, how are we going to capture the data, because without the data, none of these views and these tools are really possible. And then in the construction, the pre-construction, construction, and commissioning process, there's a variety of tools out there that allow us to enable this process, like BIM 360, BIM 360 Field, okay, and the entire suite of tools around the BIM 360 platform for managing the information. And then we have ModelStream going into Maximo for the post-construction and operations. Revit obviously forms the foundational piece to all of these components. And then there's an as-building process, and then a data extraction piece, which is the ModelStream piece. And then there's some kind of analysis and reporting throughout the entire process that's done. So really we have one big picture here of how the information moves from the beginning to the end, all electronic, no rekeying of information, and a seamless data transfer. And this is what allows us to achieve what we call day one operational support. So let's look at a couple of the real world scenarios here just to sort of recap a little bit of how things are done. So in this case here for the Goethals Bridge, we worked on the analysis of a design model. We took that design model, made it facilities management ready. We put in place a structural naming convention, implemented ModelStream, and migrated all the assets over. Total time frame was 4 weeks. So now the entire bridge infrastructure is managed inside of Maximo. Denver International Airport, one of our oldest clients on the ModelStream platform, uses it now to synchronize real-world conditions for any kind of renovation work that they do. So they will be able to take the information from their operations system, put it back into Revit, cut the piece of the model out that's going to be renovated, hand it off to their design team. Now the design team has current information in it. the renovation is done, the construction work is done, it's completed, that model gets handed back to the BIM group, and they then reinsert it back into the master facility model, and then that model gets resynchronized with the operations and maintenance system, and new assets are published back into the operations system. Very smooth and clean process that they've put in place to manage the information. So what is our goal here? To develop as-built models, which are these composite models. They now become the record model. So the as-builts are no longer just a snapshot in time, but now they're relevant for the life of the facility. The facilities maintenance and operations staff get the visualization tool embedded within Maximo. They get to do their work area verification. They get to do the assets in context. And so we've got this full, complete picture now of information that has moved from design and construction all the way into operations, giving the operations staff the information that they need in a timely manner. And a lot of what we've learned here so far is that BIM integrated with operations can save you 5% annually on your operations expenditures. Operations and maintenance is really now a part of the BIM process, and the data transition period has to be incorporated into the organizational structure in order to effectively transfer information across all projects. So with that, if there are any questions, we can answer those questions